Hello there, friends. I'm Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, and I'm here today with
Jim Elliott
and Joy,
and we are going to have a
Coffee
Convo.
Convo.
Coffee Convos is an opportunity to share the work of God in the lives of our friends, and for us to get to know Jim and Joy and how God has worked in their lives. So excited to talk because y'all have some cool stuff to say. I mean, I think you do. Did that seem surprising that someone might assume that you have cool stuff to say?
Yeah.
Oversold it right at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we lived a little bit of a different life.
So who are y'all, and why do we have you on Coffee Convos? And tell us about where you're from and family bio, history, how you met, whatever parts of all that.
Okay, I'll go first. Jim Elliott, but no relation to the Jim Elliott that was martyred in Ecuador with with Nate Saint and all those guys.
Yeah. Some folks listening probably don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, well, he was martyred back in, I want to say early 50s.
I was going to say, I think 50s.
Yeah, so he and four others were martyred in the, which work was he in? Do you remember?
I want to say Ayore, but I don't think it was.
No, that was the NTM work.
Oh.
10 years before
they're talking missionary lingo.
Yeah.
It's like when military people get together and they talk out of the language.
No.
Well, yeah, so Jim Elliott and four others were martyred in the 50s. Actually, in our mission, 10 years prior to that, our first 5 missionaries were also martyred.
Really?
In Bolivia.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the start of our mission. But, no relation. I don't have any relation to Jim Elliott. My dad was Jim Elliott, worked at Penn State. So I'm named after him and my grandfather.
Cool.
But my family bio actually goes all the way back to the border clans of Scotland. Braveheart, all that. Yeah, we were one of the worst clans that was there. So.
He looks smashing in a kilt.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
I
I'm
never
kidding. I've never seen it.
So, but Joy and I, we
post
met,
that picture.
We met in the training with New Tribes Mission. We were with the New Tribes Mission. They've changed their name to Ethnos 360.
Okay.
Trying to get away from that, the word mission and stuff, because some countries are a little more touchy about that we work in.
Yeah,
and
that would actually sort of limit the mission occasionally in some sense.
Yeah, and actually they work in some closed countries, so they have to be a little bit careful about that. But we were met in the training, went to Indonesia as tribal missionaries, ended up in the province of Papua, which was formerly Irian Jaya. So if you get the February 1996 edition of National Geographic magazine, there's an article in there on the Korowai people that build their houses way up in the trees.
Really?
We were 20 miles away from them.
Wow.
So that's kind of our background. Joy has a little bit of a different bio than I have. So, I'm from Pennsylvania, by the way. So,
cool.
I'm originally from San Diego, but have never really lived there. My parents were missionaries. I grew up overseas my whole life. Probably only spent, maybe 9 years of my life in the U.S., maybe.
Wow.
Something like that, yeah.
So I'm very confused. I don't know where I'm from or where I belong, but I'm headed to heaven.
You're a child of the world
That's
in
gonna
that
be
sense
yes,
from now.
yes.
For now, yes.
I was going to say that coffee convos in Indonesian would be pembicaraan tentang kopi.
I believe you.
That would be...
you could have said, your face is as handsome as a ham sandwich.
I could have.
Yeah.
Probably not, but no.
So what did you just say?
In Indonesian?
Yes.
Pembicaraan tentang kopi.
Okay, so what would be, I know the translation is coffee convos. How would they put those words together? Does that make sense?
So the talk of coffee.
That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes, the talk of coffee.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
So that's Indonesian.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So how many languages do you all
She
speak?
speaks like 5.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Name
have
them
to
all.
get
English,
Okay, English, Kayung,
which is a tribe in Kalimantan.
when I grew up.
Okay.
Huaulu, which
Tribe
was
in
Malukus. Moro, which is the tribe we were in,
Syrian.
Okay.
and Indonesian.
Yeah.
And Indonesian is almost like a first language to me. I was so
Really?
little when I learned it, and
She dreams in it.
I
Really?
yeah, I miss it actually.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But anyway, I met Jim
Yeah.
when we were in training. We have quite an age gap between us, but it works perfect. What else?
Anything about your history and bio that's worth telling, which
I'm-
is fairly interesting by itself.
I'm mostly Cherokee Indian. I love my heritage.
She's
Yeah.
1/8 Cherokee.
Yeah. Everything else, I'm just an American mutt. So, not sure what to
I'm as plain Jane and opposite of you as possible, probably. My people came over on the boat from England. Actually, the 12th signer of the Mayflower Compact, I am directly related to.
Oh, wow.
That's not boring. That's amazing.
Well,
You should get some kind of recognition for that.
it means I could be in the Sons of the American Revolution
Well, there you go. Yeah.
and societies like that. That's what it means.
Cool.
No, I
Yeah,
am
it
related
is
to
cool.
John Milton, the famous author.
Really?
Yeah, he's like my great, 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 great. I don't know how many greats.
Yeah.
Uncle.
Cool. We're tangentially related to Abraham Lincoln by like a number of greats, because Mary Todd is a cousin of somebody who's a direct descendant of mine. So there's actually a picture of Abraham Lincoln on the campaign trail where he stayed with our descendants. So I inherit a cool picture of Abraham Lincoln someday.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you all met in training. Tell us a little bit about missionary training. I think some folks may assume you decide you're going to be a missionary and you raise support and you just go. But it's actually a pretty extensive process in lots of ways that some of our folks may not deal with in reality quite yet. So,
I think in the end,
What
it
happens?
depends on really where you're going to go.
okay,
So, I mean, if you're, going to go to, say, London, England,
sure.
it's a little bit of different training that you would need for something like that. But with what we were doing with originally New Tribes Mission, they only work with primitive tribal people.
Right.
And typically, tribal groups, it used to be traditionally tribal groups that had had no exposure to the Bible.
Right. Okay. Was that one of the main things that was like that started the
Yeah.
mission?
Yes, it
No
was.
exposure to the scriptures?
Yeah, Paul Fleming
Cool.
was the guy who's credited with starting New Tribes Mission.
Okay.
Now he started it actually in conjunction with some other men. So, but he was really the one that had the vision of it. And he had been in Malaysia as a missionary, almost died from malaria, and he had to leave.
Huh.
And so that's why when he came home in the late, maybe mid 40s, yeah, because New Tribes I think started in 43 or something like that during the war. So he came home and realized the great need for missions in these tribal works.
Sure.
And his focus then was with works that nobody else was working with, that had had no exposure to the gospel.
Cool.
And had no opportunity to hear the gospel. And so that's a big difference
Yeah.
for a lot of areas in the world, because there's a lot of areas in the world that may be remote, but they have access.
Sure.
Maybe they have churches in the city, they have radio, they have TV. Well, a lot of these tribes had no access to even be able to hear the gospel unless someone was sent.
Right.
And I mean, straight out of the book of Acts, where
Yeah.
it's written about how how can they hear unless one goes,
Yeah.
and how can they go unless they're sent.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the basis of the mission. Because of the type of work that we were doing, the New Tribes had they had an extensive training program set up because they realized, look, we're going in a really difficult situation, so we want to provide the training that people are going to need to be able to do this.
Because you're talking, we throw out the phrase cross-cultural. And even going from here to the UK or London is a different culture.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
Oh, yeah. It's
But there's
gonna
a
be
ton
hard.
that's parallel and that makes sense.
Yeah.
The language being obvious and things like that. But you're talking about an entirely different planet in a sense
Yeah.
here
Yeah. So
than most of us are used to.
they realized that all the training in the world isn't actually going to prepare you to be able to do this.
Yeah.
You can go through 10 years of training if you want. You're still never going to be prepared for some of the things that you're going to see.
Oh, I'm sure that's
And that's
so
very
true.
true. So they provide you with that foundation.
Yeah.
So basically, they want to make sure people know the scriptures. So they have a 2-year Bible course. After that, it was a 1-year what they called, what they used to call it boot camp. What do they call
Missions
it now?
Institute.
Missions Institute. Get away from that Army connotation.
Can't talk
you know.
about boot camp.
No.
The missions
But
institute.
it's actually kind of like almost being in the military. So
Well,
that
I have a friend who's a former youth group kid who's part of Free Burma Rangers, and they do
Yeah.
military
oh
training.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we so you have that. The second phase of training was a 1-year boot camp Missions Institute, where that was where you learned the cross cultural aspect.
A lot of the practical.
Yeah, and so you can have that understanding of what you're going to face with this different cultures that we're going to go into.
Yeah.
Third phase of training was the Language Institute. At the Language Institute, then you're given the tools that you're going to need to be able to break a language down and then learn that language from its basic components. And they're giving you the tools, phonetics, phonemics, all the different linguistic techniques, so that you can go anywhere in the world and break down any language.
Cool.
And so now, since we've gone through, they've combined all three, the last 2 phases into just kind of 1 2-year course. If you've got a good enough Bible education, you have to do the Bible school.
Yeah.
We did, I in '93, I went to the Bible school.
Okay.
Was there for 2 years. My last semester, that was when I first met Joy,
Okay.
because she was a freshman coming in, brand new in the States from Indonesia. And
Jungle Bunny.
yeah.
Jungle
And
Bunny.
then-
Is that what they called y'all?
Yeah. In '95, I went to Papua New Guinea for a year to work as an intern at a campus we have over there,
Okay.
which is in the interior of Papua New Guinea.
And was that a common thing for folks who might be going to places like y'all were experiencing, to go to some place and do a little bit of that kind of interny kind of work?
Not so
a part
much.
of the process?
The campus over there was what was part of the interface program that New Tribes offered, which was open to the public. Anybody from 18 to 80 years old could go over there for a 6-week crash course on missions.
Oh, cool.
Is what it was.
Yeah.
And so I went over to help for a year doing
Gotcha.
maintenance and all that stuff.
Gotcha.
Came back, went into the second phase of training, and that's where Joy and I kind of met again.
Uh-huh.
And we were in southeast Kentucky, which is kind of another world up there. And yeah, so we met there, and then ended up getting engaged and got married and went over to Indonesia.
Okay.
Now, the area that we were in is you have Australia, and then you have, for the people watching, you have Indonesia that comes out like this to the west.
Yes.
Right? And then Indonesia is the largest island archipelago in the world, 17,000 islands, with some big ones. What are the main islands?
In Borneo,
Borneo,
Java,
Sumatra, Java.
Irian,
Yeah,
well, Papua now.
yeah, it's not
But
Papua.
and then the Spice Islands are there.
Oh, sure.
And,
Bali.
Timor, Bali,
Yes.
Yeah.
all those places.
So you have the island archipelago that stretches out like this, and it's as wide as the United States is.
Wow.
That's the size of it.
Huh.
So the island that we were on was the island of Papua,
Yeah.
which is shared by 2 nations.
Yes.
It's shared by Papua New Guinea to the east, shared by Indonesia to the west.
I'd forgotten that. I've known that.
Yeah,
Yes, okay.
and so that island is actually split right down the middle with the border.
Uh-huh.
2 different nations share that same island. And we were 10 miles this side of the border,
Okay.
right in the middle of that island.
Huh.
And so it used to be
Very remote.
Irian
Yeah.
Now it's called Papua. And that was where we ended up going. But yeah, we
we flew
ended
in
up
on a
over there.
helicopter. They dropped us
Yeah.
off. We built a house.
You parachuted in and
We had to
Flew
build an
in.
airstrip, and
Well, we did. Her brother. We actually allocated with her brother and his wife and family.
Okay.
So we teamed
They
up.
didn't just send the 2 of you all.
no.
No, with New Tribes, they want to have
The ideal
teams.
is 4 families, but we didn't have
Yeah,
the
okay.
manpower for that. So
Okay.
when we went in, it was just us and my brother and his wife were our coworkers to begin with.
And that
So-
was what year-ish?
That was
When-
when we moved. Interior was 2003.
Okay.
When we went to Indonesia in January of 2001, and so altogether, I think in missions we were about 25 years, but we lived about 20 of that overseas, and then about 17 of that in the interior location with the Moro people group.
The Moro. How
Yeah.
do you spell that?
Morop.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a P there.
Yeah, Morop. It's,
Morop.
yeah.
So there's a bit of a P that you actually say. There.
Yeah.
Morop. Okay. Cool.
So,
Yeah. So it was her brother and two other guys had done a survey in that area in 98.
98.
To just kind of get a lay of the
see
land
what's
and
out
see
there.
who's where.
Also,
Yeah.
for our works, we never go into a location unless we're invited by the people. That is one requirement, is that the people have to have
Right.
invited us.
Okay.
Now, they don't always invite us for the right reasons. They're thinking the great white man and all his wealth. Little did they know. But they...
We're probably poorer than
Yeah.
you, as it turns out. You know how to get your
so-
food already.
Yeah.
So they're thinking that we're going to build houses and schools and all these
Oh,
things, which
yeah.
we right away tell them to begin with, we're not going to do that. That's
Yeah.
not what we're here for. We're here to translate the Word of God into your language and to bring the truth,
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
what God's Word says to you. So we don't go in under any preconceived ideas, and yet in their minds it's still. And we did, when we went in, we took medical work because even though we're not trained doctors, any little help we can do, a malaria treatment can save a life.
I've heard stories of old missionaries talking about doing surgery on people.
Well, that's
because they
kind
didn't
of what
have,
we did.
Right, yeah, because
Yeah.
they didn't have that kind of medical care. And
Yeah.
so you end up being, I mean, obviously you're there. We're going to translate the word for
Yeah.
you. But you end up doing
Yeah.
a ton of things.
You're your own everything. I mean, you're your own vet, you're your own doctor, you're
Right.
your own
Electric company.
electric company. Yeah, we had to put in our own solar system. But the other thing we thought too
So
is,
I would have died, is what you're saying. I would have died 2 weeks in.
well, there were several times we almost died, but God's faithful.
Yeah.
But yeah, when Jesus came to this earth, he didn't just care for the spiritual needs of people.
Right.
He cared for their physical needs as well.
Sure.
And so using that example, we tried to care for the physical needs of the people as well.
Cool.
To the best of our ability. And a lot of times that really stretched our ability. I mean,
I bet.
we didn't plan on going to set broken bones and put IVs in and catheters and all these other things that we ended up doing
Wow.
to save a life.
Yeah.
And God was faithful in giving us the ability to read, so we can read books and figure out how to. We didn't have YouTube
I was
in
going to say,
there.
you couldn't just look it up on YouTube?
We didn't have internet, so But
That's funny. Everybody's first thought is, you just watch a YouTube video.
yeah. No, but in
That's
doing
awesome.
that, it was neat. When we moved in, 9 out of 10 babies died.
Wow.
And when we left, there was about 9 out of 10 that lived.
Wow.
So, and a lot of it was just teaching basic hygiene.
I'm sure. Yes.
They live in constant fear of the spirits. So everything that happens is spiritual. So for them, they wouldn't even name their babies till they were 2 years old, because they were just like, they're gonna die. I don't want to get close. So they didn't love on their babies. They didn't hold them. I mean, the babies lived in a string bag on their back, and they would swing them around to nurse them. And then when they got dirty enough, they would change the leaves under them. And then at night, they would hang them up on a wall. And that was the interaction they had with their babies till they realized, okay, this one might make it. So just,
That's a different planet.
yeah. So just teaching them the basic, you know what, bathe your babies, care
Yeah.
for them,
Yeah.
love them. And when we took our babies in, because when
Yeah.
we moved in, our kids were babies, they were just amazed at the interaction we had with our kids. And
Yeah.
our son was 1 when we went in.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother story, watching God's faithfulness with keeping your kids alive and all these things. But
Yeah.
but just really,
Because most parents here won't send their kid to camp unless the parent is also sleeping with them throughout the night, overseeing.
Yeah, and that's an issue for missions. I mean, you were asking about the training and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there are people that look at something like this and they say, I could never do that. I
Oh,
could never take.
right.
I would never take my kids. And if we're going to walk with the Lord, the Lord never promised to take us into a safe area, but
He asks us to do the opposite.
He promises that He's going to be with us, though.
That's right.
And that was one of the big things. And when we allocated, like I was saying, her brother did some survey work with these other guys, and that this area had always been on Ray's heart, her brother. And so he said to me, and we were trying to think of where we could go, because there's a lot of places in the province there that you can go.
Okay.
And the need is still really great for missionaries. And so he said, my heart's always been on this area down there in the village of Tarup with the Morop. We didn't know they were the Morop people back then. But he said, I'd like to go back in there and do another survey and see if they'd want us to come in. So we did. We flew down to the one airstrip that these original 3 guys didn't know about that airstrip when they first did their survey, and they hiked through the jungle for 4 days.
Just about died.
Just about died. And then they found out, there's an airstrip that's a 7-hour hike away.
They're coming out after 4 days like, this was here the whole time.
Yeah. So Ray and I hiked up 7 hours, and the people were very responsive. And so then we made plans to allocate. When we moved the families in then, we flew in with the heli. Okay. And the people actually had a clearing in the middle of the village, and so we were able to land. And you have to realize that when we allocated, we only had 18 tribal houses there, and they used a lot of the parts of the sago trees and other trees that are in the area to make their houses. We had 18 of those, and that was it. I mean,
for the village, as we might think
that's
of it.
the village.
At the time, yeah.
Historically, our people lived in hamlets.
Okay.
Family groups of 3 or 4 houses together.
Yeah.
And they were cannibalistic.
They were cannibalistic.
Okay.
Back then. But that's all there was. There was no stores.
Now, were they cannibalistic when you got there?
No.
They had been before.
They were not, however, just a few years prior to us arriving, they had gone through a time of famine and had returned to that somewhat of cannibalism. But they had been removed from that. The government came in years before and had
about 30 years prior to our arrival,
and had told them that they would annihilate them if they continued cannibalism. Yeah. So they
basically,
so it's very different, very different.
Very primitive setting that we went into.
Very different,
very primitive.
But
and people think, well, are you going to go in and you're going to change the culture? And there are certain cultural things that we do change just by our presence. But
sure, even if you're not intending to do things.
Mm-hmm. Sure. But the teaching of, knowing the scriptures and a level of morality changes their culture as well. And I've told people, I said, going into the Moro people, it's like this little microcosm. It's like this little experiment to see how far into the flesh that man can go. How dark can it be? How dark can we get?
How godless.
Our people, they were cannibalistic 30 years prior to our arrival.
Yeah.
They actually used to kill and eat their own kids.
Crazy.
And I had never heard of that before. Crazy. And our people used to have a village celebration every now and then, so they'd pick out the
naughtiest kid in the village was the one that got cooked up for the village celebration.
If a family had too many...
I would like to say out loud, this is a first on Coffee Convos.
If a family had too many kids, sometimes they would, the latest, the newborn...
And too many would be, we don't have the resources to raise this kid.
Yeah. And there's no family planning or anything like that. So that was one thing that we actually did when we went in, as part of our medical work, was to offer a certain amount of family planning. I mean, we do that. I don't want to have kids yet, so...
Well, and a lot of the motivation for that was I got to the point where I couldn't sit by and watch the mothers leaving their kids out in the jungle to be eaten by ants and stuff, because I'm like, okay, there's a way to help you with this so we don't have to get to the point where, and giving them some birth control to help with that and stuff. Because we also weren't in a position where we could adopt every kid that they didn't want, Yeah. So anyway, but God was real faithful and brought us through a lot of things. And I mean, some of the hardest things we experienced were times when, we had one time where our son quit breathing. And I knew that the closest helicopter was an hour and a half away to get to us.
Right.
Another an hour and a half out to get to the nearest clinic,
He's not going to not breathe and stay alive
for 3 hours.
Right?
Yeah,
that's not going to happen.
And so just having to fall on your knees and pray and ask God, Lord, I know you called me here to sacrifice, but I didn't realize you meant my own son, and things like this. But just really...
You're replaying Abraham and Isaac.
No, but just... that is probably one thing I loved about missions work. And not seeing my children almost die.
Right, sure.
But seeing God's faithfulness, tangibly, constantly
Yeah.
working miracles and doing things that we don't get to see in the States because maybe life's a little easier, you know. There's 911, there's
Right.
15 minutes to Laughlin or whatever it's called now.
Yes.
And
Greenville Community East.
yeah, something like that, you know. And I'm like, when we got back here, Jim got stung by a bumblebee and went into started going into anaphylactic shock, or a honeybee, sorry. And to me, I was like, well, let's get in the car and go to the hospital. Who cares? It just wasn't, for both of us, it was kind of a no big deal thing. We just
Right.
drove to
One of
the
our friends
ER.
asked
and
us about it later. He's like, yeah, you guys had a rough week. And I was like,
we both had been in the
What?
ER that week
did-
for
we
various
did?
things.
what? And he's like, yeah, you got stung and Joy had this thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it just was so different when
It just
when
wasn't a big deal to me
yeah.
Right.
here.
So just seeing, I mean, being able to see God's hand like so clearly was just so amazing and so precious.
Yeah. The
And yet,
dependency had to be there.
yeah, and yet yeah, it
Well,
just
and we, there's this illusory thing that we live with luxury and control and material things that, why do you, hey, we gotta get this kid to the da-da-da. When I often will do something, I think, wait, I should have talked to God first. Right? Like I'll go ahead and do something, and I think, wait a second, I probably should have thought about what God's word said and talked to the Lord first. And here I am 30 minutes into doing the thing, right?
isn't that
yeah.
how Joshua got into that agreement with the tribes he wasn't supposed to because he didn't talk to God first?
Yes.
You know.
Well, and it talks about that with the Israelites, and even Moses warned about that.
Oh, yeah.
And the Lord warned them about that. When times are good and times
Yes.
are easy,
Yes.
your heart's going to turn away from me.
Yes.
And we're the same way here in this. And it's the same for Joy and I being back. And I'm like, how's my trust in the Lord? Am I trusting in? Am I not trusting in the Lord? It's not so much that I'm going to trust in this thing over here because I've got it. But is it just reducing my trust and dependence on the Lord because I do have everything that I need here?
And I think our stresses and hardships are here in the U.S.
Sure.
We do have that.
Oh, sure.
It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different level, and there's things that are super hard that happen here in the U.S.
Yeah.
and in our lives even since we've been back.
Yeah.
And yet it's apples and oranges. There's no comparison in that. Yes, it's hard. I mean,
Sure.
life has its hard knocks. It doesn't matter where you live or where you're from or
Yeah.
all that. So, but we
difficult.
have the same God,
Yeah.
right?
And difficult circumstances do force us to exercise our dependence on the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's what we experienced overseas.
Yeah.
I think that's something that kind of saddens me with people I've known here in the States. I'm just like, you've got a pretty good life here, and you're not able to exercise that, and you're not able to see the Lord really working almost on a daily level in your life. And I'm like, man, that was an advantage I had. I feel a little guilty of it sometimes having been overseas like that, because it's almost every day that you're like, okay, Lord, what are you going to do today?
Yeah.
What are you going to do today?
And it's not like he's not working here in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they are not seeing,
Yeah.
acknowledging, aware. So what are some of the things about the transition and being here that have been hard, easy?
Well, I remember
Fun,
the first time we
terrible.
got back, we walked into Walmart and we got a cart, and I went down the bread aisle and I thought, oh my word, there is so many options.
Paralysis.
And yes, and
I feel that way any time I go into a store now.
yeah, I couldn't believe and also you're coming from having been interior. I didn't even get to do my own shopping. I sent out a list, and every 3 months a plane came
Stuff
in.
just
What was
arrived,
on my
whatever
list?
they had that
Yeah, and
the
so
bill.
I go in, and you know what I did? I turned around, left the cart, and we walked out. I couldn't even do it. I was just like, I don't even know how to handle this. And then I went in with the purpose of just buying great value everything, because I knew, I'm like, not that I'm promoting that, but I just was like, I have to go with one goal and not even look at the other options.
When I was in seminary, I know it sounds crazy, I did the same exact thing. At Jewel Law School, They had this whole section that was nothing but generic, and I decided, not only do I not have time to make these decisions, I don't have money to do anything other than this one aisle, because I felt some of that paralysis, and the reason this also comes to mind is in a way that's parallel to what you're saying. We had a missionary friend. I'm a preacher and professor's kid, and so we had missionaries and preachers in our home, and we had a missionary friend who came to the States and sat in the grocery aisle because they were going in to get something, who knows, and they just slumped down and bawled. They just cried because it's too much, and there's incredible sort of blessing at the same time. This person talked about, like, you all don't understand how much you have, which was sort of, he said, it's sort of a little heavenly, but also terrible, because he was paralyzed by the situation, but also thought what God's blessing is like must be far beyond this material stuff, right? Not that that's what you were saying, but
no,
a similar situation.
It astounds me. So one thing that was also hard coming back is hearing this new sentiment of people who are almost anti-America. And I thought, America is the last place to go for freedom. And if freedom stops here, guess what? There's nowhere else to go. And I'm just like, I'm like, after coming out of a third world country where we don't have freedom, we aren't able to, we're not allowed to talk to a Muslim about the Lord, or we go to jail.
Right.
Unless they,
which is true in most of the world.
Yeah, unless they specifically ask you a question.
Yes.
And that was one reason why we were able to go into the tribe, is the government considered them to be unreached. And in Indonesia, you're required to be one of 5 religions. You don't have a choice. You have to be. And so because of that, they wanted people to go in to make these people religious, right? But I'm like, so that to me was hard. I'm like, America's amazing, people. It really is. God has so blessed us, and the roots that were founded on God. You see that even prisoners have a code of conduct here.
Right. There's a moral fabric underneath this.
And in the tribe, there was not that. It was godless. And often our kids would ask, Mom, why are the people so mean?
Wow.
Now different tribal groups were different culturally, but our culture was very in your face, very hard, very mean people. And so for me to be able to tell my kids, this is what happens when you take God out of a society. You get this terrible life, really. So anyway, for America, Jim and I love being able to jump in a car. You realize for 17 years we had a 1-mile radius that we could go. And then when we did go anywhere else, it involved hiking up to mud, up to your knees. So I told Jim, it's almost like we were living in prison for 17 years, It was beautiful there when it wasn't raining, which we were on the rainiest place on earth, according to National Geographic.
Really?
So it was
How
rarely
often?
not raining.
Every day?
Every day.
We got an average of what?
Inch and a half of rain every day
every
on
day.
average.
So we got over 700 to 800 inches a year, every year.
Our record for a week, I think we got almost 3 feet of rain in 1 week. So we had one of those inflatable pools out back.
Yeah.
I didn't really have to fill it.
No,
I'd have
you
to go out and
didn't.
drain it every now and then so it wouldn't collapse, But you asked things that we, when we came home.
Yeah.
So Joy had mentioned that we were, you're in an isolated area.
Sure.
So we're in a valley. We could see down the valley 7 miles to the lower village.
Okay.
And then to our north were mountains that were about 13,000 feet tall. And so when it wasn't raining and it was sunny out, it was beautiful. Just an incredibly beautiful area.
Which is so rare. We
Which is-
hardly saw the
yeah.
surrounding because it
So-
was foggy and rainy usually.
Very isolated. And the only way out was to, eventually we put an airstrip in, so we had the fixed wing come in because helis are expensive. But we used heli mission. We ended up only paying for fuel because it was subsidized. Cool. Tremendous ministry that they had to the missionaries overseas, so we could afford to allocate. Anyway,
So helicopters can do more in terms of getting to more places, obviously.
yeah,
That
because
was
you
the
don't.
advantage of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, they can
Okay.
pop in.
But when something
little
goes
tiny
wrong,
spot.
they don't have more options.
Well, and I've
Right.
heard the helicopters. Not that I'm some, but aviation becomes a thing for missionaries in remote places, of course. Moody Aviation, not too far from here, was. Helicopters can go very wrong, and they're super hard to fix, and there are way more problems you can have with them as opposed to an airplane.
fixed wing,
So they can do more, but it costs a lot more. And so I recently read about this. It's strange, but
Every hour flying a
It's interesting.
helicopter, 3 hours of maintenance on average.
wow.
So yeah, it's quite the difference. That's why
Yeah.
we put the airstrip in, because it gave us more options.
Cool.
Less expensive.
Yeah.
But I mean, we paid for everything. You know, our mission we weren't salaried. We're a faith mission, and so
Right.
we had to depend on the Lord month by month for what He would prompt people to give us.
Yeah.
But she had mentioned the isolation that we were in there, and so I mean that was our setting, and so you're there for roughly. We would go out every 6 months, something like that.
Well, the ideal was every 6 to 9 months. A lot of times we
to go out to
couldn't.
town, and then we'd take a break and then go back interior.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, then we would go on furlough, supposedly for a year, but our visa situation really prohibited that. So we'd be 6 months to 9 months here in the States and then go back.
And you never made it to a year.
No, we never did.
Yeah.
So anyway, in 2018, we came back. Somebody's phone's ringing.
Someone's buzzing.
Sorry.
It's probably Micaiah calling. We came back.
That is
and
not a first on Coffee Con.
Okay.
Don't worry.
One of the things that stood out to me was we were sharing at our other church out there in off of Lebanon,
Yeah.
the Grace Brethren, past the Bright Zoo out there.
Yeah.
And we're standing there at the old parsonage, and you could look out and you could see the double lane highway going out off into the distance. And I'm standing there and I'm like looking at these trucks. I'm just like, wow, look at these cars going way out on this long highway. And I'm just like, wow, look at, man, that's just amazing. Look how far they're going. We had nothing like that. I mean, the furthest I could see in our area was
You
7
were
miles.
feeling it was another perspective on the isolation you had been experiencing.
Yeah, and just when we would drive then, like if we drove out to Johnson City,
Yeah.
we're just like, look how vast this is. I mean, it's just, because
Yes.
when we go on breakout to town, we're in the coastal town of Centani,
Okay.
and you got some roads there, but you know, your top...
But nothing like what we're.
Oh,
Your
your
top
top
speed
speed
is
is like, we're on your
30,
little motorbike,
35.
your top speed's like 35, 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're in a car, you might get up to 45, 50.
Maybe.
But
Then you
we
hit a
don't have the
pothole.
highways there like we have in the States.
Right.
You get over onto the island of Java near Jakarta, the capital city over there, Bandung.
Most of the
They have
world
got some
doesn't
place.
understand what we have with our
Oh,
roads here.
oh man,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
so different coming here. And I was just, you know, that's just out on 11. I'm just like watching these.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, and even very developed countries, the roads in lots of developed countries aren't like our highway system at all.
No.
Still.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember in history class learning about some of that, and I remember the teacher saying, one of the number one reasons why the United States has succeeded economically is the highways. And I thought, what? What does that even mean? Like, I couldn't even conceive of it as a teenager. Now I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
is
yeah.
very different. And so that sense of isolation, and you come here, or other parts of the world you've experienced, and it's, what? How's that feel?
Well, I remember for me, for the first, well, probably for both of us. I mean, we're both social people.
No.
So coming home, I was thinking, oh, I'll just love being around people again. I mean,
Yeah.
I can talk to a rock. I love talking and I love
Yeah.
being with people. But we would go out with people, and after about a half an hour, we were just overloaded. I mean, it was just like
That makes sense.
we were stressed out, and both of us were surprised by that. And
Yeah, we'd go out on break, and I found,
It's interesting.
because I'm spending, 8-10 hours a day with doing language study,
Yeah.
culture study, stuff like this, and I'm only using English with my wife and my kids.
Right.
And then kids went out to the international school. And so now it's just me and Joy. She's the only one I have to talk to.
Yeah.
And so we would go out, and all of a sudden, and if we were having either like conference or we had a bunch of people at the guest house that our mission had out in town,
Yeah.
and if there were a bunch of people there, like we'd have like our Tuesday night meetings, stuff like that for worship and fellowship, I would start feeling way overwhelmed.
We'd go
and
hide in our
I would
room.
just go off to the room, and I'd tell Joy, I'm like, come on to the room.
Yeah.
It was funny.
So
'cause
they
then-
built in this thing so that people from PNG and Indonesian isolated places, okay, this is the part where we let them go be by themselves.
Well, it was funny because then I was talking to one of our other missionaries, Steve Crockett, that's in the Moy work, and
Same kind of setting?
he was.
Okay.
Oh yeah, very isolated, and he was saying that. I guess Carolyn was telling you, his wife was telling Joy. She's like, yeah, Steve just gets overwhelmed. He'll just go hide in the room, and I'm like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
I
it's
get it.
like, I get that. I'm like doing the same thing.
That's
So coming
interesting.
back here, it actually for me has been you've got to kind of ease back into this thing in being with people, and even coming into the like the setting here in the church.
Uh-huh.
I'm sitting there, and like when we first visited, I'm sitting here. I'm like,
Right.
wow,
Yeah.
purple lights. That's
Yeah.
Love it, love
I'm
it.
like,
Yeah.
it's different. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a matter of getting used to things again, being around
Yeah.
people again.
And having
I'm
the
even
privilege to
finding-
worship too,
Mhm.
and just be able to.
Oh, sure.
Both of us used to sing before we went to the mission field, and then
Yeah.
after not using your voices for like 20 years, we like to belt it out. We may not sound as good anymore, but like
yeah.
it's so special having that ability to worship together and
And a sense of being with the body
yes.
Mhm.
in those ways, yeah.
Yeah, and even being in like we started attending the life groups and stuff, and being in that setting with these people, and it's not a bunch of missionaries sitting around talking about the tribes. It's like wow, this is different. And I actually find it difficult to, I guess maybe I'd say, find empathy a little bit, or be able to relate to other people
Yeah.
that have worked all their life in a full-time job.
Yes.
And I'm like, man, yeah, I hear you telling me about that. And I'm like, man, it's hard for me to relate to that. And I'm like, because I just haven't done that.
Right.
I've been
Well-
heading into missions since 1988. That was when I started.
Yeah.
So,
Missions work is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it's
Oh,
so every day it's different. Every day
Yes.
it's different,
I'm
and
sure.
and so it's not like that.
I can't imagine getting up at 6:30 every day, getting on the road by 7 to drive in, 30 minutes to work, working, 8
No,
to 4,
you
9
did
to
that before you
5.
were
I
in
did
missions
that some
for
before
several
that,
years,
yeah. But I'm like, wow, that's amazing. It's hard for me to have that, to relate to that.
Yeah.
Just haven't
And-
had that.
In ministry, but especially in missions, like you're talking about, you can have a plan. You can say, this is what we're doing, and here are the steps, right? But you better hold loosely, because it's going to change by noon. It doesn't matter what your plans are. I know that's true for me. I mean, and when you said you are 24/7, and you're working hard. There's no doubt about that. But it's not like the company mission or your company or your business is setting that agenda so much as responding constantly to needs around you. And in that way, it's very different.
It's
Yeah, that's
exhausting.
interesting.
It's exhausting. There were days in the tribe where I would lay on the couch and just lay there and just be like utterly exhausted.
Yeah.
Not necessarily even from the physical aspect. I mean,
Sure.
the physical
Oh,
aspect
sure,
was
but-
always there. But I remember some days I was just like so absolutely exhausted at the end of the day. I just could barely move. But yeah.
But
Lord's faithful. He enabled us to do it, and He's brought us home now. So
Yeah.
we're not getting to your questions.
And-
Oh, yeah, I
about
do.
that.
We do
what
have
I would
questions.
say
But
for young people interested in missions,
yeah, that's one of our questions.
I would say go for it.
Yeah.
God has sent the Great Commission out, and it applies to all of us. And
Yeah.
if you're
Absolutely.
interested in missions work, you will never find something so rewarding and yet so challenging, but rewarding in your life. And it's just amazing. And I would say go for it with every ounce of your being, because God, he can't steer a ship that's not moving, or not, God can't. God probably could, but you can't steer a ship that's not moving. So move and let God steer you, because it's amazing to watch him work.
What would you say are some things that you would give as some advice to people who are interested in missions, thinking about missions? I know actually we've got a number of young adults who on their mind is a form of missions that they're thinking about. And even half a dozen of them are thinking overseas kinds of things and not here. What are some things you'd say are some, looking back, you would have done differently, or some advice for people going into missions, young people who are interested?
Number one, absolutely pray about it and seek the Lord's will in it, where he wants you to go, not necessarily where you want to go.
Yeah.
That's a trap sometimes we fall into.
That's very good, yes. Because I think a bunch of people say, oh, I want to go. Yes, I want to go. But I want to go in this way. And I've always been thinking about this. And my idea with my gifting and my talents are da-da-da-da-da. And they have very specific terms for all of this.
Yeah.
That's one thing I found a lot of,
Yeah.
sorry, millennials, younger folks talking about that.
Yeah. If I had to do it again, I'd be a missionary in Bali, right?
I've been thinking about retiring in Hawaii myself.
Yeah, missionary in Hawaii.
I would be one in Mexico because I would never have to get on a plane. I could drive there,
Nice.
But yeah, seek the Lord's will in it, not your will.
Yeah.
And sometimes those get confused. The other thing is just realize that, the Lord has called all of us. I don't want to say all of us into missions. He's called all of us to be witnesses for what he's done.
Right.
However, temper that with the fact that I don't believe that there's a specific calling that we have to go into missions, because that's part of God's command. And that's was my calling, was go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to all of creation. I was like, okay, well, why can't I do that?
Yeah.
And back in 1988, when I was looking at what does the Lord want me to do, I started thinking about missions. Our pastor at the church I was attending at the time had been a missionary in Vietnam for 20 years. And so, of course, he was very big on missions. And I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't the Lord want me to go? And I've heard other people say, you better have a specific call to go into missions, because if you don't, you're going to be out of God's will. And I'm like, really?
So instead of that posture, it's unless he tells you no,
go.
Go.
He'll close the door. If he doesn't want you to go, he's going to close the door.
Super easy.
And, the Lord, if you go into missions and you go into a tribal setting and you share the gospel with these people in their own language, and, you get to heaven, you think God's really going to sit there and say, you know what, you went and shared the gospel with those people, and there were tribal people that got saved. I'm really upset with you. I didn't want you to do that.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen.
No.
And so, I mean, that's really the thing to realize, is that, the Lord wants us to be sharing our faith.
Yeah.
Here in Jerusalem, then Samaria, and then the rest of the world. And if you feel you have that desire to go, man, go.
Yeah.
I went kicking and screaming. I did not want to be a missionary at all in any way.
Up in it,
I saw how hard it was on my parents. I saw the difficulty and the way ministry affected our family and how hard that was and stuff. And I did not, and I was not going to be a missionary. I absolutely not. And
I was not going to be a senior pastor ever.
So I mean, but when I got to the point in Bible school where I finally started walking with the Lord again and realized that life was about serving him and not about me.
Yeah.
That's quite a story in and of itself, how the Lord brought me out of myself and to, well, I'm still into myself.
We'll bring it back for another coffee convo.
but I'm just like, it's just, he made it so clear, right from, God, if you want me to go, I need $500 and I have no way to get it. So obviously I'm not going. And the next day it showed up in my mailbox. And I'm just like, okay, no, take it back. I really don't want to go. And, but right from the get-go, as much as I fought and did not want to go, God took me there.
Yes.
And I'm like, and would I trade it for the world? Absolutely not. To this day, would I jump on a plane and want to be a missionary overseas where life kind of sucks most of the time? I'm like, no, but God.
Yeah.
But God.
That's right. You got a grandchild to help take care of here.
Yeah.
In the States.
Oh, and then they're
as
looking
it
at
turns
going
out.
off to the mission field. I'm like, oh, wait a couple days.
Yeah. We do have lots of questions. We've answered a lot of them because they're missionary-focused questions. But tell us about your goats. Because there apparently is at least someone on staff who, let's see, do you raise your own goats to make your own goat milk soap and yada yada? The goat lovers on staff would like to know more about all things goat.
Well,
There's a lot to know about goats.
we came back from the mission field, and when we started caring for my parents on their farm, we were like, what can we do to make this farm work for us? And they had goats. And since then, we've increased our herd greatly. And we make goat milk soap.
Okay.
And our goats, we have 23. We're working for 60. And
60 females.
60 females, preferably, since the males don't produce anything really.
Now, I'm not really into goats. And like I said, it would take 2 weeks and I'd be dead
Yeah.
in what you
Well-
experienced. But 60 sounds like a lot.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're thinking too big. I don't know.
We'll
think
figure
big.
it out.
But before we left the field, we ended up out in town. We ended up resigning from the team there, Interior, moved out to town for our kids because they were in high school. And our son needed us there as well, his last year. And so when COVID started hitting, we're seeing on the TV, Trump's closing down Europe and stuff like that. No more flights from Europe.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is big.
Yeah, this is something.
And so I went in and
bigger
told the
than-
guy, Joy and Micaiah and his buddies were in his room, and I was like, hey guys, you guys need to see this. So we knew it might shut down real fast.
Yeah.
So we actually we were kind of ready, and we were getting ready to leave
To
as
bring Micaiah
well.
home.
We were going to leave after graduation in May.
Okay.
But this was end of February. And I told the family, I was like, hey, we may have to leave within a few days' notice. And it was like that.
Really?
We had about 3 days to finish getting everything done. And we were in the process of closing down anyway out there in town.
Yeah.
But hopped on the plane. We were on one of the last planes out. But prior to that, we knew we were leaving the field. I'm like, well, what are we going to do? We've got the farm that we bought from Mom and Dad, her parents. And how can we make this thing work for us? So I'm like looking online, microgreens or, heirloom tomatoes.
Yeah.
What can we do? Beef, who knows? And we only had about 40 acres. And so they had goats. And so like Joy said, I stumbled on this thing looking on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I find these ladies are making this, they look like my mom, making this soap in their kitchen. And I'm like looking at these, kind of frumpy old ladies doing this stuff. And they're doing this soap thing, and some of them were making goat milk soap. And I was like, well, I could do that. I'm like, if she can do it, surely I can do it, right?
Yeah.
I got a degree from Penn State University.
Sure.
In
that plus YouTube's all you need.
in bugs and entomology. But yes. So anyway, so that's how we kind of got into the goat milk soap. And her parents already had goats on the property. So
Okay.
we ended up switching over to the Kiko breed, which is a new breed out of New Zealand.
Huh.
Very strong breed. I forgot what I was going to say. This is typical of me usually. So.
But anyway, so with the goats, all things goats, they're a fun animal.
They're stinky.
Especially the males, really stinky.
Huh.
I smell them before I see them, literally.
Yeah.
But they're a lot of fun. They all have different personalities a little bit.
Sure.
You get to know them to an extent,
Yeah.
Now we're not raising ours for pets.
Well,
we're raising
I
ours
still
for the
name 'em
commercial end. She still names them all. And
That's
I'm
the
like,
danger.
"You shouldn't do
Getting to
that."
know them.
Yeah.
Every one of them has a name.
Yeah,
That's funny.
but we have we actually had a bunch of males born a few months back, so we actually castrated and turned them into wethers.
For
Those are the
meat, if
castrated
we need
males.
them. Yeah, they're called weathers.
WETHER.
Yeah.
Is how it's spelled. So she gave these males
all
weather
I have
names.
lightning, thunder, tornado, hurricane, cyclone.
And I didn't figure that one out until like a month or two ago. I'm like,
I have to give credit.
That's why she gave them all those.
That was
those
Josiah
weathers.
Harris, my son-in-law. That
Yes.
was his idea. Give them all weather names because they're weathers. So
Nice.
But we don't actually
if
milk
I
our
don't give
goats.
him credit, I'll get in trouble.
We don't milk our goats. We get our goats from milk from a third party. And the Kikos aren't great for milk. They're more of a meat goat.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if
we
you
do
want
a
good
little
milk goats,
bit,
get the
but
Nubians.
it's
Those are good.
it's the
Nubians,
outsourcing.
huh?
Yeah.
Nubian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're great milk goats. But anyway, so that's what we do right now. One of the fears I had coming back to the States is our whole married life we've been in missions.
Yeah.
And we have worked together 24/7 every day of our lives.
Yes.
Worked together side by side, getting a job done, and it terrified me, the thought of being in different jobs and different places. And now that we've been in the States, we have a lot more apart time because he'll go and work and do stuff and I have other jobs to do. But we still want to be doing something where we can minister together.
Yes.
You know, always be working together, and we love that.
Cool.
We're best of friends. So
Yeah. Cool. We always like to end our time with 2 questions.
okay.
What's God teaching you lately, and what are you excited or encouraged about?
You go first.
Me.
What's God teaching you lately, and what are you excited or encouraged about?
For me, I think it's actually God's really been teaching me grace. And like Jim was saying, it's easy for us to look at the church around us and not extend grace because we think a lot of the struggles are petty, or we think,
Yeah.
and just learning grace and being able to say, God has each of us right where he wants us to be and is working in each life individually in
Yes.
just as dynamic way as he has worked in our lives. And
Yeah.
and learning grace, and also just I don't know, I feel like we're almost starting life all over again for us.
I bet.
And learning to
bet.
trust God for provision and income. When you quit missions, you kind of lose everything, you know, your
Right.
churches, supporters.
Right.
So just
And it's not like you've got some huge nest egg sitting there making a bunch of money.
no,
and even
there's-
if you
there's
had
no
some sort of nest egg, it's not doing anything
retirement
now anyway.
nothing.
Yeah.
So
Right.
just being able to watch God's provision in our lives and trust Him, and trust that He's got us even here.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like a failure when you quit missions. Like,
Right.
you know, you're not actively, amazingly doing God's work anymore. And that's not true. You know,
Right.
God
No.
has us each where He wants us. And
Yes.
so God's, I mean, we both have a lot to grow in and learn, and we're
Cool.
just normal people who love Jesus,
Yeah.
you know. And what was the last thing?
What are you excited or encouraged about?
I'm excited and encouraged about FCC.
What?
Yes. We attended a
I am
church for
too,
years that we love. They're
Sure.
an amazing body of believers, but
Yeah.
we weren't able to have a functioning part, and FCC has been an avenue for us to really be able to, we feel like we can be really involved and really not only just invest in other people's lives,
Right.
but just love the worship and the teaching, and so we're very, I would say both of us are very excited and encouraged to where God's going to take us in this
Cool.
new journey we're on.
Yeah, because you do have the freedom to figure out what that looks like for you here.
And it's a little bit of a new thing too for us to experience this, because you got to realize Interior, it was home church every Sunday.
Right.
You know,
Until we had
So,
Right.
believers,
you know, the
and
kids are
then it's
like,
not in your own
you know,
language.
great.
You
How
know?
long is Dad going to talk today?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Being a pastor, I'm
I've
sure your
experienced a little
kids
bit of
have,
that.
yeah.
So for me,
Good stuff.
let's see, what's the Lord teaching me?
Yeah.
I think just dependence on Him to remain in that. I mean, coming out of that, you know, that tribal setting where, I mean, any day you could be facing, you know, get bit by a death adder. That you have a log fall on you, or you could fall into a, you know, off a rock in the river or in a ravine or something like that.
Nature's always trying to kill you.
Yeah. Or
Sounds extreme, but
or
that's-
the tribal people. I mean, the tribal people, you never know what they're going to do too. So
Really?
I mean, we were never overtly threatened by them, but
Okay.
we'd have, you know, old Marcus up there came down with his machete one time. You see all the ladies running past your house. You're like,
Something's
"Dude,
going on.
what's going on?" They're
Something's
like,
going
"Yeah, he's got a
down.
machete. He's going to kill us all. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, I guess I'll stay down here. But yeah, just dependence on Him. where we are in a land of plenty here,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
And again, you know, I think back into the Old Testament where, you know, you think of where the Israelites said, you know, when we had everything that we needed, I think they say first, when we had a lack, our souls were fat because we depended on the Lord so much. But when
Right.
we had everything we needed, our souls grew lean.
They were looking for pots of meat.
You know, and
Yeah.
so it's like, you know, that was a reflection of, you know, boy, we've got everything we need here. We're not trusting the Lord, so it's that dependence on Him. What I'm encouraged right now or looking forward to is just to see kind of where the Lord's going to lead us here. I mean, we've started this little goat milk soap business,
Yeah.
and like we're trying to get into stores to do wholesale now, and that I feel like I'm always doing something new. It's always like a learning thing for me. Went into missions, knew nothing about it, learning a language, learning culture. Now I'm coming home and I'm learning
goats.
business and goats, you know, and all
Yeah.
that. So, just seeing where the Lord's going to lead us in these things here.
Cool.
And how He's going to provide for us. So that's kind of where we're at.
Good stuff. Super interesting, y'all. Thanks for the convo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Join us next time for the next coffee convo.